This industry that's not really respected. Everyone wants to talk about it. Everyone wants to talk about mental health and how important treatment is. But when push comes to shove, so many of these companies, and private practice is its own sort of outlier, I think, compared to like what's happening with larger organizations and when you work in community mental health, and it's sort of like a safe haven for folks. And I love that. And often what I think about is how can we pull what works for so many therapists in private practice back into these other environments that clearly are not taking any of these ideas, messages, principles into consideration when they're building these companies and these environments.
I think the two things that you run up against when you're trying to take what makes the private practice guy lean and mean and competitive, and then pull that individual knowledge into an institution. And the two things are, one, just like size. Like when you have a really big hospital, when you have a really big anything, change kind of becomes the enemy. No matter how many courses you say, we want to improve and innovate, and please bring your suggestions and new ideas up front. Like you can't really believe that. And you get this kind of like insecurity at the end of the like USSR imploding of like, well, that's a very good point that you bring up, except like we cannot be wrong. And like I just had those interactions in the hospital where it was like, if you're right about this, we're going to have to go back and do so much work that we can't really do that. So just don't say that again, even though we ask you to bring up good ideas. And then the other thing is capital. I mean, that these are profit-seeking companies, and as long as that's there, then is there a difference between me keeping somebody for a long time who's really good, or just kind of kicking them out the door as soon as they can go compete against me, and then getting another person who is right out of school and maybe isn't a great therapist, but I got to employ 500 people. So what's the cost benefit for me? Why would I keep this person when I can pay that person less? So the larger places, you may get a good therapist, but if they can figure their thing out, they're going to be on their way out,
That's right. That's right. Because, and this is true, I think, for any good employee, regardless of what industry you're in, is that if you're not being treated well in your environment, good folks are going to leave, right? And trust that they can find their way to an environment that supports them better. So I think that's largely, what we see. As soon as people build some competency, they get their full licensure, they realize that they can do this without being exploited or without being treated like crap or without being inundated with these caseloads that are making them literally sick. They will make plans or get to that realization where they need to go do something different.
Yeah. Well, and the colleges are different now too. I mean, a ton of the stuff, like the bigger places, the people who teach it or have all the awards or whatever, they'll say, well, I'm a therapist too, but it's like, you're really working at the student counseling center, 2 days a week or something. Like what you're doing. And I know that you're famous and you've got all these fancy doctor awards, but if you went and tried to sell this in the strip mall, it's not competitive enough for anyone to buy it. And so because of that, it's like, well, this person wrote the book or they have all the credentials that are medical, but then this other person is lean and mean and making all this money individually doing this other thing that the hospitals fundamentally can't. They're going to be the last to come around to something like brain spotting. They're going to be the last to figure out, what to do with EMDR, which they just never really figured out what to do with the research there. It's always going to be easier for them to do cognitive behavioral therapy and drugs. And so you see like the cutting edge private practice people moving in a different direction than academic psychology, which is a bad thing for the profession. Like, I don't like that that's happening when I pointed out, like, that shouldn't be happening, but it is, So many people come out of these programs being told, well, CBT is the gold standard. It's the best thing ever because it's the most researchable.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not doing a very good job bringing back our real world learning and understanding of what works in clinical practice back to academic institutions, back to teaching folks about the history and politics of this industry, right? Back to, teaching somatic, work and all kinds of things, a lot of the things that, I value now in terms of mental health and healing are not things that I learned academically, like we were saying, CBT was kind of the go-to. I think it still is. It's fairly easy to learn. It's fairly easy to train people to do. It's fairly easy to administer, not always. And it works for some people. And just sort of kind of good, like 2 stars out of 5 is like what we're getting, I feel like, in a lot of environments with what we're producing, from school programs. And it's just not working. You go.